muscle contraction can be mediated by stretch reflex, or it can be mediated by voluntary intentions or voluntary contractions. And here we will look at the role of alpha and gamma both, okay, as we discussed this morning. So I'll be drawing from that live discussion, inshallah, in this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, first up, we will look at the muscle spindle related contractions and the role that muscle spindle plays in it. This is a very simple diagram in which he has shown the muscle to be stretched. You have increased afferent fibers. Let me just magnify this a bit. Okay. Right. So increase afferent signals to the spinal cord. It's okay if you can't read it. It's good now. So muscle is stretched, increased afferent signals to the spinal cord, then increased efferent through the alpha motor, and you have muscle contraction. Okay. Again, this is reflex contraction mediated by alpha motor neuron. So there is a mention of alpha motor, and when it contracts, very importantly, you can see that the firing rate of the sensory neuron decreases. It shows in this graph as well. When you stretch the muscle, the sensory information started to go up, and it went down when you contracted the muscle. Pretty straightforward stuff. If there are any questions, let me know. There shouldn't be any questions because this is really easy. Okay? But still, if there are questions, please do let me know. Now we are solidifying the stuff that we discussed this morning. Okay, class? Yes? Should I proceed? Okay. Okay. Right. Now, this is where you will appreciate the quote unquote protective. Welcome back. He is loading the upper limb with some bricks or whatever this is, right? And as the load increases, the muscle tends to get stretched by the load, right? And as soon as it's stretched, it contracts. So this is a good slide in revising the word loading from nerve and muscle classes last year. So when you load a muscle, it stretches. I like these words because this is typical muscle physiology words. Loading a muscle. So when you load a muscle, it gets stretched, and when it stretches, it contracts. This is a classical, simple description of what muscles stretch reflex is. Right? Questions? Any issues with this? This is pretty basic stuff. It's my habit of repeating things and showing some pictures or graphs to solidify or repeat the stuff so that it becomes a concept in your head. Okay? Okay. Now, again, this is should not come as a surprise at all. Hold on. Let me just look at this frame here. Here you go. Okay. Now, this is stretch. It's also called myotactic reflex. Very simple. Stretch of a muscle causes contraction of the muscle. Now, this is where we are now going into some detail. I mentioned it to you in the morning that we'll go into some detail. So, types or phases, okay, or stages. There are two. One is the dynamic stage of the stretch reflex, and the other is the static phase of the stretch reflex. Okay, by now you have read these words thrice in three different situations. The dynamic and static sensory response of the muscle spindle. That was one. Then you had dynamic and static gamma efferent fibers. That's two. And now you're looking at the same words in a third context, the stretch reflex. Well, basically, welcome back. So, as I was saying, this is not new because this is based on the static and dynamic sensory responses that you have studied already. But still, I wanted to say it out so that there is no confusion. Students, when they go through this chapter, there's a lot of dynamic, static word usage in different contexts. So here I have I've just mentioned it in all those three contexts. Okay, they are interrelated, of course. So when a gamma dynamic fiber fires, it increases the hold on the dynamic sensory output of the nuclear bag fiber. So it is related. All these dynamics and all these statics, they are related. Okay, and they, by the way, form the dynamic response of the stretch reflex as well. So it's actually one whole thing shown to you in three bits separately, because obviously we can't have extremely long lectures. Okay, so the lecture is divided into time instances, where in one instance you read the sensory dynamic and static. In another instance, you study the gamma efferent dynamic and static. And today you are discussing the same words, the same responses in the stretch reflex context. I hope this is clear. So, the stretch reflex is mediated by, the dynamic is mediated by 1A, while the static is mediated by 1A and 2. And this should be now familiar to you. The static response is mediated by 1A and 2, and the dynamic one is mediated by 1A if you remember your sensory physiology, sensory muscle spindle physiology. Okay. So final point is the dynamic stretch reflex is also called phasic. It comes in phases. It's not there all the time. While the static one is called tonic. It's there for a longer period of time. Okay? The classical example of stretch reflex is knee jerk. Questions? Any questions? Okay. So this is that very old diagram in which you have the rectus femoris, and this is the muscle spindle. This is that 1A fiber going through the dorsal horn and terminating on the, what is this? This is the alpha motor neuron for the muscle, concerned muscle. Okay? So, afferent, and then in green you have efferent. Okay? And you can see right here that it's a monosynaptic reflex. This is a monosynaptic reflex in which the afferent directly innervates the efferent neuron. And remember, when you don't have any interneurons in between, when you have this sort of monosynaptic situation, you have very good control, very fine control over the muscle contraction, or very fine conversation between the sensory and the motor division of the CNS. The more interneurons are involved, it takes more processing, and there might be a signal loss issue. However, when there are less number of synapses involved in an arc, then you have more fine control, as I'm sure it sounds also very rational. You also are seeing now that there is another division which here, hold on, there's another division here which we didn't speak about because No, no, no. I mean quick. Fine as in fine control. So more close control in the less number of synapses. More number of synapses means signal loss and all those kind of things. I mean, I'm comparing these two things. These two things are English wala fine. However, if you want more control, you would want less. Remember in the physics electric circuit, the less number of resistances, the better for current flow. This is exactly that kind of thing. Okay, right. So this we will discuss in the when we'll discuss. Hold on. The financing control depend on the size of motor. It does. It does. It is multifactorial, and today you've learned that number of synapses is a factor in that. Okay, right. Okay, the other aspect is inhibition of the antagonist muscle. Remember, whenever you want to contract a muscle which happens to be around a joint, it's equally important to inhibit the antagonist muscle. Okay? So agonist needs to contract, equally important the antagonist needs to be inhibited, then this will contract properly. Okay? So the stretch reflex stimulates directly the agonist, but a branch also very importantly inhibits the antagonist. More of this when we discuss reflexes formally tomorrow. Okay? Chalo. So a bit more on the, I hope this color is not distracting. I can change it if you want. It will take me a bit of a while, but if it's clear, then it's clear. Is the text clear to you on this slide? It's clear. Great. That's great. Okay. Now, so we are discussing dynamic phase or dynamic component of the stretch reflex of the knee jerk. It is elicited by obviously a dynamic tap on the patellar tendon. So when I say this is, listen up, when I say this is elicited, what I mean to say is when you do your jolly old knee jerk, so when you tap the knee at the patella with a reasonably sharp blow of your reflex hammer, the first thing that happens, this is the concept now, okay? The first thing that happens is stretch reflex dynamic component. Welcome back. This is part of your practicals as well, where you'll be performing deep tendon reflexes. When you do the knee jerk, when you hit the patella, the first thing you see, if you hit it properly, that the knee would extend. But that is the dynamic component of this reflex, and it is present in all the deep tendon reflexes. We call it DTRs. Okay, so the dynamic component is that loud thing that you see immediately when you achieve or when you perform or when you supply the stimulus for the respective reflex, right? So that sharp tap of the patella acutely stretches the quadriceps femoris, which stimulates the, now you know the technology behind it, which stimulates the dynamic bag fibers, because we know that anything sharp, by sharp I mean anything quick, is picked up by bag fibers in the dynamic response, sensory response. 1A does this business. It conveys the argument to the spinal cord, and this typical stretch reflex then gets mediated. The knee is extended by contraction of the agonist muscle, and now I will add the inhibition of the antagonist muscle. Yahan tak theek hai? Is this okay till now? From here till here in this red box, all good? Hurry up, hurry up. All good? Should I proceed? Great. Now, check this out. What is this? A slower static response. A slower static response ensues. Now remember this, please. I'm not sure it's given like this in the textbook. When you perform a deep tendon reflex, the first thing that happens is the dynamic component. Okay? However, it is followed by a slower static response. So the muscle spindle just doesn't give you the dynamic response and contraction and that's it. No. The slower static response, which also got triggered when you hit the patella, gets to show itself when the dynamic response is over. Sorry, welcome back. I'm saying it doesn't get said, so I'm saying it. So first is the dynamic, then is the static. Now, the clinical bit we'll be discussing tomorrow and then later on in the descending tracts. But I just want your eyes here on this section of the slide, please. This is the UMN, upper motor neuron lesion. Please just look at this so that you have a memory of this. Okay? And remember, we discussed it under the stretch reflex. So please remember, we mentioned upper motor neuron lesions that can exaggerate a stretch reflex. Just remember that. Okay? And that these reflexes are absent in a thing called spinal shock. That's enough for now. Any questions on this main stuff? Okay. No. Then we talk about the static itself. So it can be elicited. It gets elicited by the dynamic response as a follow through of the dynamic component. So how does the static response manifest? बेटे वही बता रहा हूँ, ठीक है? So first is the follow through of the dynamic response. The static is there. And now you can, okay, hold on. It's the tone, Abdullah, just to give you the answer. It's the tone. The muscle tone is still taut. The muscle is still taut even after, sorry about that. Even after the muscle's dynamic response is over. Okay, to give you your answer. Now, so but the static is not just a follow through of the dynamic. You can actually elicit it as a separate function. So I've mentioned this as a follow up of the dynamic response, or you can passively bend the knee. So in a live person, when you are alive, as opposed to the dead body, in which when you flex it, you will literally feel in the cadaver, you will feel that if rigor mortis hasn't set in, it will be free. So I was saying in the live person, live as in awake and live, not unconscious, you will feel that when you passively bend the knee, you would feel that you are actually doing something. You will actually feel in your hand. This is a very perception-based thing that I am trying to explain to you verbally online. So you can imagine the loss of signal here. Signal as in quotes wala signal. But when you bend a knee passively, you feel a certain degree of resistance put up by the knee. That is what he mentions by when you passively bend the knee, you passively stretch the quadriceps femoris, and this passive stretch triggers the static nuclear chain mediated response that you have now studied many times. Okay, and this causes a sustained tonic contraction of the muscle, which manifests itself as an increased tone. It's more subtle than your brutal dynamic response, which tuck extends the knee. This, however, is just a subtle increase in tone. Yes? So we have studied that A, it can be elicited by as a follow through of the dynamic response. B, when you want to do it independently, you passively bend the knee. It goes into your typical standard static response, which then causes a sustained contraction of the muscle which manifests itself as increase in tone. And by the way, this is where it also needs to be mentioned that this is how you maintain a posture. Can I tease you with something? Try getting up from your seat without bending the knee. Try to get up vertically. I mean, vertically, by what I mean is voluntarily try to contract the quadriceps femoris and try to get up without bending the knee. Welcome back. Did you get my question? Or rather, challenge? We can't get up without bending the knee. Okay? So, what happens? Yes, but if it's a typical L, in the typical L configuration, you can't get up. Okay? It's not possible. Maybe it's possible for Abdullah Javed. We don't know. Maybe he is the mutated next generation of human beings. But for us mortal beings, it's not important. It's not possible. Okay? Why is it not possible? I'm going to explain it to you right here. These are the magic words. Can you see I can't see my finger here. Okay. These are the magic words. Okay. Maintaining posture. Now remember, please remember this. Static component of stretch reflexes help you in your daily posture business. You're getting up, you're sitting down, your movement. Most of the walking and running of the lower limbs are augmented by the static stretch reflex. How? Well, let's take, for example, the standing up challenge. When you bend the knee, basically what happens? This happens. This happens. The stretch reflex happens. So when you bend the knee, he has actually bent the knee here. When you bend the knee, the stretch reflex gets triggered and it contracts the muscle. When it contracts the muscle, it's an extensor of the knee, right? It helps you extend the knee. Simple. Okay? So in this case, you haven't done the dynamic wala jhatka. You actually have passively, nicely and smoothly bent the knee. So the static component of the stretch reflex literally helps you stand up and maintain your posture while you're doing it. It keeps the knee joint stable, tight. Welcome back. Is that clear? This is the application of the static stretch reflex. Okay. Anyone can suggest something. What can be a possible application in practical life of the dynamics phase of the stretch reflex? I mean, this is obviously a clinical test, isn't it? But what about daily life? Anyone? I hope that silence is the silence of your thinking and not your procrastination. Come on, come on. Think. Say something. Any ideas jumping up would be welcomed. Any practical manifestation or example of the dynamic component of the stretch reflex? Yes, yes. Okay, fine. Noor, I'll take that. That's passive. So any acute scenario, okay, anything which makes the muscle jump in stretch, sudden stretch, uh, you are running or walking and suddenly you come across an obstacle which is unexpected, and the muscle gets stretched oddly in that one bit of a second or something. That bit is equivalent to the knee jerk that you elicited in a patient. Right? Anyhow, this is threadbare discussion. You can always discuss, excuse me, you can always think about these things in your time. Yeah, the foot corrects itself.